Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amy,
And my name is Sarah.
and we are your podcast hosts. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about our best and worst clinical scenarios and clinical placements. So, Sarah, take it away.
Let's just think back to our nursing student days and all of the clinical placements we had. And, you know, at least I had a variety of different clinical placements, and there are a few that stick out in my head. But I think before we even get started, it's good to just think about clinical placements in general. Like when you're a student, it's good to have this experience. I know at least when I was a student, everybody was complaining about how we didn't get paid. But looking back, I think it was a really good opportunity to just make mistakes and ask all the questions I wanted to ask and know afterwards, was it something that I could see myself doing or not doing? So it's really just eye opening to get all this experience because you wouldn't really get it otherwise. Um, what is your take on this, Amy? Like your, of your
So
time?
so when I think about clinicals, I it's kind of funny. Like the first thing that kind of came to my mind was like sheer horror. So I don't know if it's the same with anybody else, but I remember at first when like I think we did our first semester and it was all kind of like book work and theoretical stuff. And then our second semester we went straight into gerontology and did our gerontology rotation at long-term care, and I remember being like super excited and be like, yes, this is going to be the best thing ever. I'm so excited. I'm here to learn. And it was absolutely terrifying. At least that was my perspective. I just remember being like, okay, so I'm looking after somebody and their life is on the line. Say what? I was just like, oh no, this is wasn't quite my expectations, but I think with each subsequent clinical rotation, I learned a lot. So yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that gerontology was your first because that was one of my first placements too. I think I was in some kind of like alternate level of care. Like it was basically gerontology, and I remember washing residents' hair because they didn't get their hair washed very often, and crushing up a lot of meds and putting it through their G tube.
Oh
And
man.
I just remember thinking like there are so many meds, and my first clinical teacher was good, but she would often grill us. She'd be like, "So what's your plan of care?" And I'd have this deer in headlights look. Like I'm pretty sure I wrote it down and I'm pretty sure I studied it, but you're asking me and my mind's a blank. And then like as you said, it got better as well. But I think my first taste of it was like it wasn't really what I expected, but I kept thinking like, okay, it's gotta get better. Like there's more out there. This is only my first placement, so I need to just focus. And I think in second year, this is when it was weird. So we had several placements in our second year. We were supposed to have a placement in mental health, and then we were supposed to have another placement in pediatrics. But then at the time, the hospital that we were at, they said they didn't want to take nursing students, or like they would only take final year students. So I ended up doing a full 6 week rotation at a daycare, and there was not a lot of nursing involved there, if you can imagine.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
I think I played with kids a lot, and then they wanted me to do some sort of health teaching, but I was like, "Well, what do you want me to teach these 2 and 3-year-olds?" So I think I ended up doing a demo on brushing teeth, and that was my entire pediatrics placement.
oh
I
my
am
gosh.
not joking.
Really?
That
See,
was
I
my
remember.
pediatrics placement, and I was like, I don't remember learning much about pediatrics. It was just sort of running around after kids and trying to get them to listen to you, but knowing that there's really not much you can do in this environment, right? In terms of learning how to be a nurse.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Like my peds rotation was on like a inpatient peds unit, and then I was able to go to like a peds surgical floor. But I mean, just kind of circling back to like your experience, I did have a placement where I was in school, and I'm trying to remember. Oh my god, I think we had like something like sexual health or something. I can't remember. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was healthy eating. That's what our topic was. And we had to do this like presentation to the school about how it was really bizarre. I was just like, okay. And they're like, oh, this is like public health. And I was like, okay. But it just felt like a cheesy, like grade 8 experiment that I was doing with like grade 5. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and then the second half of my second year, I had another placement. Again, I think it was a 6-week placement in mental health, but it wasn't inpatient mental health. It was more like mental health outreach. So it was an organization that had various activities during the day for, I guess they call them survivors, like mental health survivors.
Right, right,
And
right.
so it was sort of a drop in program, and there would be meals and there'd be activities. And so I was there with another student trying to learn, I guess, about what they were doing. And okay, so where do I start with this? So the other student that I did this placement with, she was part of my school as well. So we were sort of partners. Like we were supposed to do assignments together and that kind of thing, but I felt like she wasn't really putting in the work, so to speak. So I felt like I
Right.
was doing a lot of the work and she wasn't doing anything. And we were carpooling there together, but I was the one that had the car. So she tagged along for the ride, but she never offered me gas money. Anyway, I started getting annoyed. And perhaps this is my first lesson in conflict resolution. I sent her this email. I probably should have talked to her face to face, I know, or called her at least, but I sent her this email saying, like, hey, I really need you to start doing some work here because I feel like I'm doing everything. Like, I need you to
Like
take
pull
some
your
initiative.
weight.
Right, right. And I don't know if she was mentally unstable, but she sent me back an email saying, like, I don't enjoy working with people who I wish would die.
Oh
And
my
so
god.
yeah, and so I took that as a death threat. I'm like, "Did you just say that you wished I would die?" Because that's pretty much what I read in this email.
Oh my god.
So I didn't know what to do at the time. I sat on it for a few days and I told our clinical instructor at the time, and she totally, long story short, she swept it under the rug and she said that because I didn't report it in time, I was supposed to report it within 24 hours,
What? There's
that
a
there was nothing she
precedent
could do.
on when to report, harassment?
Yeah, and me being a second year student, I think I was 19 or 20, I didn't know any better, right? I'm like, "Well, if you're not gonna do anything for me." I remember emailing someone above her, and then she sort of did something behind the scenes and, like, neutralized the whole situation and told them it was nothing to worry about. So, anyway, I decided that I didn't wanna drive with this person anymore because I didn't feel physically safe with her in my car. So
Right.
we started showing up to clinical separately, but, like, together the whole day, and then the person, I guess, like, the person who was supposed to be our preceptor, she was the only nurse at that, outreach program. She had some sort of outburst, I don't know what it was about, where she was swearing at the director in front of all of the people at this program and me and the other nursing student, and she got fired. So
Yeah,
then
I'd imagine.
so then it's like this awkward situation with the student who's, like, emailed me a death threat, and then we have no clinical person there, like no clinical instructor. And we didn't really have a whole lot to do with the mental health aspect. I just remember us doing some sort of food handler certification with the staff so that they would have some skills to bring into the workplace.
Right, right, right.
So it was like super weird, and I felt like it was very awkward towards the end. And I guess I learned a little bit about mental health, but I feel like things could have been way better.
You had, like, a personal touch to deal with with mental health, not so much the patients, but the people that you were working with?
Uh huh.
Yeah, that's
And
pretty messed
yeah,
up.
it was just messed up.
Yeah, well, like, if I think
Um,
it sorry, go ahead.
no, I was saying, like, it does get better, but this is basically my second year of nursing here.
Oh my goodness. So I'm gonna kind of go back to my first year of nursing with my gerontology clinical, and I remember being really excited at first, and then by the end of the clinical, not being excited. So I think one of the things that they kind of forget to tell you when you first start doing your clinical is most likely you'll be seeing the work that is being done by the nurse, but you might not necessarily be doing it. So you might be actually doing more of the work of someone in allied health, a PSW, or whatnot. So they didn't really fully explain that to us. Because really, I guess when you go into long term care, not saying that nurses don't do assessment, because that's a part of their job, but there's a
Mhm.
huge portion of the RNs that do med pass, which essentially is like giving out your 8 o'clock, your 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever your scheduled meds, and then doing your assessment on the patients. And I think it's something like your RAI or something. I can't RDS. I can't remember something like that. Anyways, so I went into this clinical really excited in long term care because it was like my first experience, kind of being exposed to healthcare in that capacity. And I remember I had this lovely, lovely, lovely demented lady. She was such a sweetheart, but she had very, very severe dementia. And one of the things in her care plan was about toileting. So making sure that like if you get her up and you get her going, that you want to get her on the toilet specifically for, I think it's like, so like we started at 7:15, you want to get her on the toilet for like 8 o'clock, let her sit there on the toilet, come back in like half an hour, and then check on her or whatever. So I got there. I'm super excited. I totally forgot about this toilet thing because I'm like doing what I think nurses do. So I was having like all these crazy conversations, like just talking to her, like combing her hair. Like it was like super bizarre. So I completely forgot about her toileting routine. So I didn't take her to the bathroom. So I'd say it was probably like 8:15 and her call bell was going off and they're like, "Oh, Amy, you can go check. Like it shouldn't be anything, whatever, right?" And I was like, "Okay." And I go into the room and the first thing that hit me was the smell. And I was like,
Oh, no.
"Oh, like what happened?" And she's like, "Oh, dearie, dearie, I think I soiled myself." And I was like, okay, let me see what I could do to help." Honestly, I remember lifting up the bed sheets. Sarah, there was shit everywhere. It was like, when you have a baby and they poo up their diaper up their like up the back
Mhm,
and around the
mhm.
corner. Well, it wasn't a baby. It was like a fully grown adult and there was poo like everywhere, like all up her back, her shoulders, down her legs, and it wasn't even like
That
formed.
sounds like explosive poo. It
It
sounds
was
like
like
there was a lot of
yes, it
force.
was like explosive C. difficile diarrhea, and I was just
She
like,
had C. diff as well? Oh
"No,
my
no, no,
god.
I'm not saying
Oh.
she did, but maybe with the putrid smell, it probably was." Like, I honestly can't remember, but it was so putrid smelling, and it was everywhere. So, I was kinda panicked, I was like, "Okay, let me get my bearings about me. It's just poo. Let me get my gloves on, whatever, and, I'll start cleaning her up." So I start kind of with like the top of her body and she's like, "Oh, it's still coming." And I look
Oh,
down and it's
no.
like still coming out. I'm like, "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god." So I'm like, I'm going to just call for help. Just give me 1 second." And she starts to cry and I'm like, "Oh no. Like this is like worst case scenario." So I'm trying to clean her up and she's kind of crying, I guess because she's embarrassed or whatever. I must have used, how like in long-term care they have those like wipes. I think I
Yeah.
ended up using like 2 or 3 packages. And she had like, but the thing is, I think the horrifying part was every time I wiped her, she would
More
poop
came
more.
out?
Yeah, more poo came out. It was like every time I
Like a
wiped her
baby,
bum,
like a
I like
baby.
stimulated her anus and like more poo came out. And then I started to cry, Sarah.
Oh, no. So you and her together crying in the
So
room.
I'm weeping. She's crying. I'm like, "It's okay." And I'm crying because like I'm just overwhelmed at this point. This is like my first clinical, like my second day on the unit, and I'm dealing with like this crazy amount of poo. So I decided finally to ring the call bell. So my preceptor comes in and she's just like, "Amy, why didn't you call? Why didn't you call for help?" I'm like, "I thought I could handle it." I was like crying copious amounts of tears. So she's like, "Okay, let me take this over and you like go compose yourself." So I think my preceptor kind of finished cleaning her up. I think we ended up taking her into the shower, like the little shower area to
Mhm.
kind of rinse her off cuz like there was no way with just the wet wipes alone I was able to manage. So
Well, I was thinking, like, you probably had to strip the bed down and even wipe all the way down to the mattress, right?
it
Like,
was
it was just
it was crazy. Like I think the term shit show came from this incident. Like it was
Or how about shit hitting the fan? That
yeah,
probably came from this.
seriously, right? It was just it was so intense, and I just remember my preceptor kind of coming in, saving the day, and kind of calming me back down. But it was like my second day, and that was like my experience. And then I remembered, like I remember like 7:30 hit, and I was like, I gave her meds, and I was just like to the toilet.
Like,
So
"See ya."
I learned my lesson. I was like, all right, I am not dealing with this again. And it was so funny because like I get well, I shouldn't say funny, but by the afternoon, because I told you she was very upset. Of course, she didn't. She like totally didn't remember. She was like, "Hi, dearie," and I'm like,
She's
"Hi."
probably like,
I
"Who are
completely
you again? Did I go to the bathroom yet? I can't remember." And
like
you're like, "I
I
will
don't
never
even
forget."
I don't even think she knew who I was. I think she called everybody dearie, and she's like, "Oh, hi, dearie." I'm like, "Oh, yeah." She doesn't remember who I am. She doesn't remember this horrifying experience. I was like, "That's great." At
But
least
can you
she's
imagine, like,
super positive about it.
how did you handle the smell? Because, like, was that your first time cleaning up poo of that magnitude?
Yes, absolutely. So this is the one thing, nurses are funny, right? So like they're just like, okay, you can't like show it on your face,
Mhm.
but yeah, it stinks, right? So
Mhm.
like I've seen nurses way back when, I don't know if they do it now, but like fully wearing masks, I don't know how that would help. I feel like I'd be even more contained with the shit.
No, no, the mask does help because I
You
used
think
to
it
do the same
helps?
thing. I would wear a
Okay.
mask because, I mean, like, eventually, you're gonna breathe in the air that has the smell, but at least it
The
somewhat contains
particles
it, and then if you're gonna make a
reflect
face
in the
like you're
air.
gagging, right, it kind of at least hides it a little bit, and I've heard of nurses that if they were going into a room where they knew there was a really bad smell, they would take, I don't know if it was, like, Vicks or something, but just rub it under their nose so that
Oh
if
my
you're
god, Vicks would burn.
breathing
It's
in, that
probably
you're
not
just
Vicks.
smelling the minty freshness instead of whatever nasty crap is in there.
Well, the thing is, it's like I guess if you think about it, there's probably like doo doo particles like floating in the air. So it's probably
Well,
like
Amy, like, anything that you smell means that there's some particles that have made it to your nose, if you think about it like that.
so yes, there were occasions that I did go in and wearing a mask, like if I had to deal with that. And then of course the other thing that the nurses would do is like with these patients from long term care, they would get there's like that special spray, I guess. I don't know, it's like a room deodorizer.
Deodorizer.
Yeah, so they'd use that like room deodorizer, and I guess maybe this was before they realized that talc powder, so like baby powder was really bad. They would like douse the patient's booty hole like with the baby powder, so they'd smell baby fresh. But yeah, like
Mhm. I remember
I
having a patient that had, well, she had cellulitis, but it was in her pannus. Like, you know how when someone's really overweight, their pannus kind of just folds over on itself?
yes.
So I remember, like, I don't remember which placement this was. It might have been med surg, but I remember having a patient that had that, and I'm like, okay, so one of the medications I have to apply is this like nystatin, which is supposed to go in her pannus fold, and I'm like, well, how do I access it, right? So I'm like, okay, can you just like lean back? So she leans back. That does nothing, literally nothing. So I'm like, can you just help me just like lift it up a little bit? So she lifts as hard as she can, and I'm pretty sure it moved like half an inch. So I'm like in there with my elbows. I'm trying to hold it up with both my elbows and then like apply it with my other hand, and it was just getting everywhere. It was really nasty. And then
Oh.
as soon as you lift it up, right, and exposed to air, then the smell hits you because it's like kind of like contained
It's
in a dark,
hidden.
moist environment. It's like festering. And then I'm like,
Oh,
right, and I'm trying not to judge as well, but it's like my first time dealing with something like this, and it was just really, really nasty. And then because it was weeping so much, after we applied the cream, we had to get a pillowcase and fold it lengthwise and like stuff it up there so it would kind of absorb all of the leakage that was coming out.
oh my
And
god.
then once she sat up, you couldn't see it at all. So I believe those stories where people come into the emerge with like a remote control stuck somewhere in their like folds of their skin and it's like lost because they just don't even know where it
Oh
is.
no.
I bet emerge nurses have stories like that and worse.
Well, like this is turning into a horror stories one, but like I remember I don't know if you ever had to, like, pack a wound or any of that kinda stuff. I
Mhm, mhm.
remember that was, like, when I did my first medical surgical placement, and, no, I guess it was on a surgical unit, and we had to, like, do packing wounds. So, in theory and kind of doing it in your lab class, I was like, "Oh, how bad could this be?" It is bad. It's horrible, and I mean, I could only feel for the patient who has to kind of deal with this. Well, maybe they don't, because they're not packing their own wound, but I mean, just kind of thinking about someone stuffing stuff into a little orifice and then, like, sealing
Mhm.
it closed is kinda, like, somewhat terrifying. So I remember doing a surgical rotation where this patient had, I can't remember what it was, but I guess it was some form of an ulceration, and they had one of those packing wounds that, like, you essentially, like, it's kind of like a thin piece of gauze, and you kind of circulate it around the wound until you kind of pack it in deeply. Oh my god, Sarah, I didn't think it was going to stop. I was just, like, shoving the packing in, and it just, like, kept going in further and
Mhm,
further
mhm.
and further, and I was like, "Oh my god," each time, and I was just like, "I can't do medical surgical." And then I think it was, like, right after that, the next day, I had a patient who had something like, I think they had diabetes, but they had, like, necrosis of the testicles.
Mm.
When you can see someone's vas deferens, and for those of you who might be listening who don't know what that is, essentially it's kind of the cords that lead to the urethra to drain to drain the urine. When you can physically see those and how deep that wound was, I was just like, I could never be a medical surgical nurse.
Mhm. I think just thinking about my placements in general, that was the ongoing theme. It was like with each placement I had as the years went on, it was like, "I don't wanna do this. I don't wanna do this. I don't wanna do this." So that was like mental health, long-term care, pediatrics, only because of my experience in the daycare. It didn't really give me a sense of what pediatrics was all about. And then it was sort of like process of elimination, and I was like, "Well, where do I go from here? I'm not even feeling medical surge all that much." But I had a really good placement in hematology oncology, which I really liked, and I think it was mainly because I really liked the staff. And there was one really hilarious nurse who was gay, and he made it so much fun. I think that was the reason I really liked it. But it was really cool to learn about all the different meds as well, and like, to see people actually get better, that was something I hadn't seen so far. Because even with wounds, right? I think the thing that frustrated me about wound care is that I never got to see the end result. It was always just packing and packing and packing, but I never got to stay at a placement long enough to see any improvement. And
Mhm.
especially with, like, people that are diabetic and they have gangrene or they've lost a limb, you don't really get to see the improvement, where I felt like with this placement, I got to see a little bit more of that. And I think that was also my frustration with mental health, is that I had another placement, I think it might have been year 3, where I was in an inpatient mental health facility, and that was interesting, to say the
Right, right,
least,
right.
because, there was, like, I'll never forget, there was this one lady that was there who already had 2 kids, but they weren't in her custody, obviously. So, the first one, I think she got pregnant when she was out on a day pass or something. And
What?
then eventually, well, I don't know, like, you
She
get
got
day
pregnant out
passes.
on a day pass?
Yeah. So that was the first child, and
Oh
then
my goodness.
eventually from that inpatient stay, she got released. She got released with an IUD and being on birth control. So what the nurses told me was that she pulled out her IUD, which, can you imagine
Oh my
how
god.
painful that must have been? Or, like, how would you even do that, right? Somehow she pulled out her IUD, she stopped taking her birth control pills, got pregnant a second time. Um, her mom said she couldn't take 2 kids, like, she's like, "I just can't. I already have this one that I'm looking after." So the second kid went into foster care,
Oh
and then
dear.
she went back into the, mental health facility, and I just thought, like, I just don't know. Everything to me looked like a revolving door. It was just like people would get discharged, they would relapse because they weren't taking their meds, they would come back, and
Right.
everybody's lives seemed to circulate around going out for smoke breaks.
Oh
It was
dear.
like I think there's something about how nicotine kind of helps people with anxiety, or like when you've got mental health issues, you kind of gravitate towards smoking. So I felt like it was just, and the other part is that there were other patients that were non-compliant with medications, and they had to be wrestled to the ground and
What?
injected with IM medications. I don't know if that was following protocol or if this was just worst case scenario, but I saw that as well.
Yikes, that's
And I
somewhat
thought, like,
scary.
I don't have the mental strength to do this. I
Right,
just
right.
don't think it's for me. I think it takes a really special nurse to be a mental health nurse, and I have so much respect for people that work in that area, but I just thought I didn't think I could handle it based on
Oh,
what I was seeing.
oh man. Yeah,
Mhm.
like when I think back to my mental health placement, so I actually was in school the year, I guess, the colleges and universities went on strike. So I missed out something like a huge chunk of my mental health placement. But I think I did maybe 2 weeks, so I would have done like 4 shifts. But within the 4 shifts I had quite the experience. And I don't know if it's just me. Like I don't know if I'm just this lucky that I have these crazy types of things happen to me, but I had this one patient who he was actually like an outpatient mental health. And I was doing like I think my first day I started in the outpatient clinic, just kind of seeing what some of the types of clinics that they'd run out of this particular hospital. And I can't remember what mood disorder clinic it was that I went to, but this particular patient was like he was very engaging. He was very very kind, very witty. Um, but obviously, like he was there to kind of deal with some issues. But he took a liking to kind of talking to me, and I just kind of took it as like like normal, or whatever, right? He's there getting treatment. I'm learning, whatever the case may be. So the next time I saw him, it's like something else clicked in this patient's mind where he must have thought the conversation that we had was very different than the conversation I thought I had with him, because we were just talking about like his medical history and stuff like that. But like I guess in his mind, it he must have thought that like I was attracted to him, which I could tell you by no means was I at all.
Right, right.
So this patient, like it was kind of weird, like he was like eyeing me down. I was like, oh, like when someone's looking at you from across the room, you just kind of like look back and you just kind of smile, and you're like, oh, this person's still staring. So a couple of these kind of odd instances. And then at the end of his placement, sorry, his I guess it would have been, sorry, his treatment, he was like, hey, so what are you doing tonight? And I was like, going home. Like that's typically the plan. He's like, oh, I'm gonna follow you out of here when you leave, and I'll wait for you at the end of the building because I want you to have my babies. And I was like, whoa.
Whoa,
I was like,
whoa.
whoa, 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 this is like not what I thought was going to happen. So I actually ended up having to report him and be escorted out of my mental health placement the next couple days by security, and actually have my it was my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, actually pick me up because yeah, this guy threatened to essentially really rape me. So yeah,
Huh.
pretty messed up. So I was like, not that I wouldn't enjoy working in mental health. I think there's a lot of benefits to working with this population. I think it is a challenging population too, because like you said, it's a revolving door. Like I mean, like with most other illnesses, let's say you have pneumonia. They give you your meds, they treat you, you leave, then you don't have pneumonia again. Well, if you have bipolar disorder or you have schizophrenia, yes, they can treat it, but it's never going to go away. It's something that will always be there. So, yes, you can manage it, but it's not something that can go away. So, for example, if someone does miss their meds or whatever the case may be, then those symptoms kind of come back. And yeah, like usually
Mhm.
it's not just one issue that people are there for, it might be many. So, like, I,
Well, I
find it
really feel
highly
for people because
interesting.
I know that, medications all have side effects, right? So
But
different, psychiatric medications have significant side effects, but at the same time, it's like balancing managing your symptoms versus your quality of life and, like, who who really gets to decide that? So I think it's really challenging. And also with mental health, obviously, you can't see if the person is better or not at a glance. We're like pneumonia, okay, we can listen to the lungs, we can do an x-ray. It's not really so black and white with mental illnesses.
Right. Yeah.
So
So like,
yeah.
no, I completely agree. And it's just it is a challenging group to work for because sometimes it might feel like, like I've heard a couple of my friends kind of talk to me about their experiences who work in mental health, and it's like sometimes it feels like, you've made great progress with a patient, and then they go out and they have a really bad relapse and is back in the hospital, or
Hmm.
you're discharging them, and you know that obviously whenever someone's coming down off of their meds, they're at the greatest risk of suicidality, and then you hear in the community that they have committed suicide or something. It's really, really depressing, right? So I think for me, I just don't think it would be a good fit for me. So, and it's not that I'm not interested, I just don't think with my type of personality that I would be a good fit for constantly working in mental health.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe it just takes someone that has had this in their life. Like maybe you have a friend or a family member when you were growing up that had these issues and you're able to relate a little bit better, or maybe you can just handle it a little bit better. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
I don't
hear
know.
what you're saying.
I mean, like, I think when we think about the vast variety that there is in terms of clinical placements, I mean, there are some people that are like, I would never want to do obstetrics. Why would you want to see people giving birth to babies? Like, some people think
Hmm.
that's absolutely disgusting, and that was just where my passion laid. It was just like I loved being able to coach women and their families through this experience, whether it would have been positive or negative, right? Like, of course, in
Hmm.
obstetrics, I remember actually my last clinical rotation was in obstetrics. So I had obstetrics in second year, and I ended up having it in fourth year as well. And I remember, like, yeah, like 9 times out of 10, it's great, right? You deliver a happy, healthy baby and things are great. But then there's that small percentage that comes in, and they're full term, or even if they're like 15 weeks and there's no heartbeat, it's devastating. And I still wanted to be that person there for them to deal with that situation as well. So I
Hmm.
I don't know if that takes a special person too, but it didn't matter whether it was happy or sad. I just wanted to be that person. So I
Yeah, I kind
I
of
have
feel the same
nothing
way.
to say about my I have nothing bad to say about my obstetrical placements because they were all great. Speaking of obstetrical nurses, they're a whole other kettle of fish. So I won't get into that because I'm sure I've talked about that on subsequent podcasts that they're like ER nurses, right? They're adrenaline
Adrenaline
junkies,
junkies,
and
exactly.
yeah, like I don't know. I think it's one of those areas where I guess some of them can be like, "Oh, you sink or swim," and that's not really a
Well,
good
it's like
way to
emerge
deal with
and
it.
obstetrics, it's the 2 areas of the hospital where you have absolutely no control over who walks through the door, and you can't like, it's just even with women in labor, everybody knows that when it's a full moon, people are just gonna start coming in droves, and you just have to prepare as best you can, but really there's no preparing, you just have to deal with what comes through the door, right?
Yeah, you never say
And yeah,
you never
and
say
you never say the Q word.
you never say the Q word. You never talk about obstetrical emergencies because I found very quickly that when I would start talking about things, things would walk through the door. It's like super messed up. And yeah, like I mean, you just kind of take whatever comes in. And I don't know, some of the stories I find were just really like some of them are funny. Just people are like absolutely funny. And then I mean, of course, like I said, again, some are absolutely tragic and heartbreaking, but I'm glad I ended up going down that route. I don't think I have any regrets that I spent most of my clinical time and experience and expertise in obstetrics. So,
Mhm, and for me, it was sort of luck of the draw because in my year, everybody wanted obstetrics as their final placement. So it was
mhm.
like there was a ranking system where you had to rank your top 3 choices, I think, and then somehow they randomly picked people, or I don't know how they really decided, but somehow I got picked, which I was super excited about. And I had an amazing preceptor. I actually had 2 preceptors because the first one said, she took too much vacation and I would need to have a second person who also turned out to be amazing, and it was just so awesome to see how people could work together so well, and
Mhm.
they really went out of their way to make sure that I got different sorts of experience. So if there was a loss, they would be like, "Okay, I want you to watch this," or, I got to see a breech birth, which I'm pretty sure very few OBs do these days. That was an experience for sure. I
Yeah.
can't say that I would want to see that again or participate in that again, but it's just nice to know that some people do still have those skills.
Yep.
And, there was all kinds of different patients. One of the stories that stuck in my mind, though, is that there was a couple that had just delivered their baby, and they were asking my advice and my preceptor's advice about what they should name the baby, and we're like, "That's a big decision. Are you sure you want us to be part of this?" And they're like, "Oh, we've got ideas. How about Crucifixa?" And I'm
Oh,
like, "Huh?"
no.
I'm like, "Did what did you say?" And he's like, "Oh, I think I'm gonna name the baby Crucifixa and call him Cross for short."
Oh,
And we're
no.
like, "Oh, well, that's interesting." And I think we started rattling off all these other popular boys' names because
You're like, "Don't do
it's
that."
like, well, you asked our opinion, so we think that that might be a little bit hard to spell. So how about something easy like Chris or
Yeah.
Todd? How about that? And, I don't know, I find that people, like, when they come into labor and delivery, they remember every single moment, and sometimes they respect you so much as their nurse that they want you to help them make these big decisions, which,
Right, right, right.
probably aren't part of our job description, but they just want you to be part of it regardless.
Yeah, like, I mean, I remember actually having a family kind of come to me and be like, "Oh, same kind of thing. Like, what should we name our baby?" And they looked at my name tag, and I was like, "Oh, no, 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 don't use my name. Like, it should be something unique." And I think they ended up using actually like my middle name. So my middle name's Anne, and I was like, "Oh, that's just as nice or whatever." But it was just like I wanted them to kind of choose something for themselves. But I mean, I guess I should have been like, "Oh, yeah, that's really nice that you want to name your baby after me." But yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of some other really great clinical placements I had. I really enjoyed my peds one. I, of course, enjoyed my OB one. But I
Did
mean,
you get to see any surgeries while you were a student?
um, I don't think so. I think the only surgery I was able to see was a C-section,
Okay.
and
I
I think I
saw
saw that
one
in
of
my
my
second
first
year, and I was like,
surgeries
"Yes, obstetrics."
I saw a CABG, which is a coronary artery bypass graft, and it
Okay.
was really cool because they, they actually crack the chest open with a
Oh.
tool. I don't remember what the tool is called, but they crack the chest open and you can actually see the beating heart. And
Oh.
they asked me if I wanted to step up on a stool so I could see a bit more, and I'm like, "Sure." So that was really cool. And I remember before they put the patient under, they said, "Do you have any questions or concerns?" And he's like, "No, doctor, I trust you entirely. Just do what you have to do. I know I'll wake up." And he did. This is not a bad
Wow,
story, in fact.
I was waiting for you to say something else. I was like, "Oh my god, that's the worst." Oh my goodness.
But I could see how people might feel faint if they're like, it's just like there's a lot going on. The OR is always freezing cold, and then you have to stand, right? There's not really a place for you to sit if you're part of the surgery. So it's like a lot of standing, and I could see how people might feel faint if they're not used to it.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
and so, like, being like, you're all gowned up and you've got the mask on, but it's also cold in the room at the same time for the surgery. And, like, there's all these different rules you have to follow. And of course, infection control is like really, really strict. So I could see how it wouldn't be for everybody too. And I think it can be really hard on your back, to be honest.
Well,
You're
yeah, I
standing
mean,
in one
standing
position for
for 8.
hours.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most nursing, like, I mean, just anything in general, you're standing a lot, but I can imagine, like, being in the OR, you're pretty much standing, like, the entire time. So, yeah, that's
And
pretty
one thing that, just
demanding.
going a little off topic, it always bothers me in movies and TV shows that they don't portray things accurately. It's like someone just bursts into the OR and they don't have anything on, not even a mask. I'm like, you would not even be allowed into the place where you scrub to wash your hands if you didn't have a mask on. I
Yep.
find it
They
very
always
unrealistic.
I mean, some of the shows, I guess, I don't know if they do reach out to physicians to kinda or nurses to kind of be like, "Hey, is this how things work?" Or they just kinda like I mean, it's drama, so they probably just they need it to be as dramatic as possible, so
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
So I'm just trying to think of any advice we might have for students, like, that are starting their clinical or maybe people that are considering nursing as a career. Um,
Um,
hmm.
my advice would be kinda to take things one day at a time, and then always just to be mindful that you might not like that clinical placement, but there's such a variety of different things that nurses can get into just in general, um that they should be like looking forward to. So we actually only talked about well, no, we didn't only talk about, but most of the placements that we did talk about were working within a hospital setting. But there's community, so public health, there's correction, so like you work in a jail, there's just a vast amount of different places nurses can actually have their clinical placement. So
Mhm.
yeah.
And one thing I would say is if you don't like the placement that you got, just go into it with an open mind because what's the worst that could happen? You decide that you don't like it anyway, but going in with a really positive attitude, I think will just look better on you. And also, I think it's important not to burn any bridges ever because if you're just starting as a nursing student, you probably don't have a lot of people to use as references. But if you can just maintain a good relationship with, your preceptor or other nurses you're working with, I think it will just help you in the long run. And just speaking as an obstetrical nurse, it is a small world. Even though I've lived in different cities and worked in different hospitals, you just keep running into the same people. So I would
Yep.
say always just don't burn any bridges, even if you can't stand that person. We've talked about this in a previous episode. Just know that the world is small, I guess, and it's not really going to be of benefit to anyone if you do that. We know that like there's people that you can meet and you're like, I know to not be like this nurse because of this and this. Like this is how they act. I don't want to be like that, but you can still learn from that person and you
Hmm.
can still talk to them with respect and still, not strangle him or her at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think we need to be mindful though, like because if I think about some of the clinical experiences that I didn't talk about, there were times where I had like not the greatest preceptor or even my clinical lead. So the person who I guess I would like if I had challenges with whoever was my preceptor to talk to that clinical lead, that they were kind of not helpful either. Like, I mean, I think I shouldn't say every nurse, but I think a lot of us have had those kinds of situations occur. And I think the best thing to do is just to be mindful, like you said, to like if you need to escalate, then escalate. Like I don't think you should feel fearful of being reprimanded if the case is, you're being bullied as a nurse or whatnot. Like I think you should just kind of, if that's your perspective and that's what you feel is happening, then you should let whomever it is know that that's happening because it's not okay. But I mean, again, yeah, don't burn
Mhm.
any bridges, but take the right and the correct actions to make sure that you're protecting yourself and keeping yourself safe as well. And again,
Yeah, and I
it's
think it's
an
important
opportunity to make
to
mistakes. So like, well,
yeah,
not to intentionally make mistakes. Let me correct myself, but like this is where if you don't know something, you ask, and it's perfectly
exactly.
fine. Should be
Yeah,
perfectly
and
fine
I
for like
kind
the
of
rest of your
wish
career.
thinking back that with my mental health placement and the death threat that I got, I wish I had done a little bit more, and I wish I knew
Mm,
more about what my rights were, but I kind of just at the time, I just wanted to get it over with and move on, so I didn't really push any further.
yeah,
But I think there's always more that you could have done or would have done, and, like, you can't just dwell on the past if it's not affecting you. Like I think if it was really bothering me every day, I probably would have done something more, but I kind of just moved on and left it.
yeah.
Hmm.
I had. I don't want to kind of get into it, but like I remember having this crazy clinical teacher, clinical lead, and we could never find her. Like if we needed help on the units, like she was never around. Like for example, and it got so bad that even the nurses were like, "Okay, let's wait till your clinical lead gets here," or and they started like calling her out for not being there. and I think we all like passed with flying colors. I don't think she read any of it because the other thing is you have to write those reports. I can't even remember what they're called anymore, but it was like,
Journals or something?
yeah, your clinical journal or whatever. And I'm pretty sure she just always said like satisfactory, satisfactory, satisfactory. I think she was just doing it for the money.
So where was she? Did you ever find out where she went all the time?
I think she just like screwed off. She just like went off the unit, and maybe she had friends that were working there. She just was never around.
Interesting.
Hmm.
So I think that, if anyone's listening and you want to share interesting stories with us, we'd love to hear them. You can also leave us a review. We'd love to hear some of your feedback about the episodes we've been doing. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Thank you for listening.